Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside, you find our July pub night. That's right, this is our pub night from July, and yes, I do realize that it is now August, but it's summer, vacations happen, so bear with us, please. But this pub night is once again expanding on the various themes that we've been articulating this year with our Why We Create series, which looks at our role as sub-creators within God's created order. And this month, or last month, July's theme was Imago Dei. So what does it mean for us to be God's image bearers, and how does that affect us as artists or just as people living out our lives? So the story that sort of anchors this pub night is George MacDonald's The Golden Key. And this was retold by our very own Christina Brown. And afterwards, me and Christina have a little Q&A where we discuss some of the themes and some of the other background that goes into George MacDonald, his writing, and this story in particular. So, without any further ado, here is our very own Christina Brown telling the story of The Golden Key.
I am really, really excited to tell you guys this story. I do want to say a couple things. It is a little bit odd, but that's kind of what makes it so magical and special. So as you listen, there's a couple things I want you to do. First of all, let the story just wash over you, because there are several ways to encounter McDonald. One of them is to look for symbolism and meaning in everything. Another is to say, that's odd. I'm going to enjoy that. You'll have to decide which of these approaches you take to the story and to different parts of the story, because maybe some of them have meaning, maybe some of them don't. Maybe they all do. So, I will be telling a story. I don't think there's any other preamble I wanted to say about George MacDonald before I started. I'm a big fan of just letting stories kind of hit you. I think there was one thing. Oh, yeah, so the story cards. The story cards, the writing and the paper, that is for you to write either questions for us on the podcast afterwards, or if there's something really strange that really hit you and you want to kind of remember it so that we can talk about it in the podcast, please do by all means, note it. There are definitely some things that I had to cut out of the story that were very, very painful to me, and I didn't know what to cut out because they were wonderful. That was very strange. So anyway, all right, I am going to start now. Now let me tell you a story that my grandmother told me, that her grandmother told her, that came from the fireside tales of her great-great-grandfather from a source we do not know. And yet I must say that I do believe it's true. I cannot say why. I don't actually believe I know myself. But I will regale you with this tale, and you must choose for yourself whether or not this story is to be believed. The story begins with a boy who used to sit in the twilight and listen to his great-aunt's stories. And she told him that if he could reach the place where the end of the rainbow stands, he would find there a golden key. And what is the key for? The boy would ask. What will it open? Nobody knows, his aunt would reply. I suppose, being gold, the boy once said, that I could get a good deal of money for it if I sold it. Better never to find it than sell it, returned his aunt. Now all of this talk might have been nonsense, did the boy and his aunt not live in a little house along the borders of fairyland. One evening, the boy stood looking out of his lattice-laced window, gazing into the forest that fringed the outskirts of fairyland, when suddenly he saw a glorious thing. Far among the trees, as far as he could see, stood the end of a rainbow, large and brilliant. He could count all 7 colors of the rainbow, but there was another color he had not seen before, glorious and sheen, but he could not name it. The golden key, he exclaimed, sprinting out of the house and into the wood. And as he ran towards the rainbow, it grew larger and brighter, and before long, he stood within 2 trees' distance of it. It was a grand sight, burning away there in silence, colors conjoining and separating in distinct loveliness. The path of colors were blazing their way into the night sky, but he could not see either its arc or its end. He stood looking at it till he forgot himself with delight, even forgot the key that he had come to seek. And as he watched, he saw figures, faint forms of people, all different, all beautiful, slowly walking up the colors of the rainbow, as though there was an invisible stair. But when he walked towards the rainbow, it vanished. It was too dark to search for the key anyway, he told himself, so he lay down on a bed of moss and fell asleep, hoping for the glad guidance of the morning sun. And upon waking, it came. On the green moss, a few short feet from his face, a brilliant glimmer twinkled. The golden key! It was as bright as gold could be, but the handle was curiously wrought and set with deep and shimmering sapphires. In a terror of delight, he picked it up, and for a long while he remained, turning it over and over in his hands, feasting his eyes upon its beauty. But a mysterious glint of blue must have winked at him. Well, that is after all my only explanation, because he jumped back and up and remembered that, of course, the key belonged to a lock, and the lock had a keyhole, so he must find it. And so onward and further into the forest he walked, eager to begin his quest. Meanwhile, great mischief had beset the house of an unsuspecting little girl. The poor girl was untidy, dirty, and poorly looked after. And her nursemaids did not like to tend the house or the girl in their charge. And the fairies of Fairyland did not like disheveled houses or disheveled people. So they set to scheming how to rid the forest borders of these offenders. Now, they say that children are most susceptible to fantastical fears. But the fairies of Fairyland know that within susceptibility is the seed of belief. And while adults see susceptibility as a weakness, in Fairyland it is a great strength, as you will see. But even the fairies cannot predict what seeds may be sown. So on the night they concocted imaginary bears and spindly spiders to chase the little girl out her bedroom window and into the forest. Her flight of terror led her to a place they did not anticipate. She ran a long way, and it grew very dark. She thought of no danger beside the bears, and when a warm light poured from a little cottage door ahead, she darted straight inside. Breathless, she scanned the room, and from the corner of the little cottage rose a grand and beautiful lady who smiled and said, "There you are. I've been looking for you for a long time." Now, the exchanges that happen in this part of the story are fascinating and very beautiful, but I must neglect their beauty to sweep you further into the timeline of the little girl and the little boy. For now, what you need to know is that the little girl, called Tangle, meets a little boy called Mossy. And he and she are tasked by the beautiful lady to journey together on Mossy's quest for the keyhole. The lady is warm and wonderful and the most beautiful thing either child has ever beheld, and they are loath to leave her. And it is worth noting that Tangle learns that her night in the forest lasted 3 years. She is no longer a 10-year-old girl, but a 13-year-old young woman. Mossy, too, has grown in wisdom and stature and knew it not. But as we return to the story, they have just agreed to leave with each other. And in doing so, were tasked to find the Old Man of the Sea. So with the benediction of the grand lady's kisses, they stride off into the forest together, hand in hand, the golden key clutched safely in Mossy's other hand. And before long, the two travelers had passed much of the journey, laughing and talking and telling each other stories that they had grown quite fond of each other. Mossy and Tangle traveled far. Their travels extended many miles beyond the forest. Neither paid attention to how long they had been traveling. Their anticipation of their quest's end and their joy in each other's company was too delightful to pay heed to much else. One morning, after a laborious several days, they emerged from a long, darkened canyon, hedged closely with grisly cliffs. Exhausted, they stumbled through the last of the length of its walls and found themselves standing on a rocky ledge that overlooked a vast valley. But looking down, they could not tell whether the valley was a grassy plain or a great rippling lake. So they climbed down and they walked to the valley's edge. But it was neither a lake or a grass-swept plain. It was a sea of shadows. But what of? There was nothing and no one for miles around. Speechless, they watched the shadows. Most of the shadows were leaves, floating and quivering in the breath of an unfelt breeze. Strange shadows of branches and stems of trees of all varieties covered the valley as far as they could see, but there were no trees anywhere to be seen. They knew they must walk onward, so they waded knee-deep in the lovely lake. It was odd. The shadows were not merely lying on the surface, but heaped upon each other as if they had been cast upon 1,000 different planes of air. And as they walked, the shadows changed. They would often thin, shifting to leave space for the shapes of strange creatures, birds whose throats were distended with song, frolicking children, and lovely female forms. Some would dissolve when they got close, and others would wander by and disappear beyond their sight. At times they saw lovers, linked arm in arm. But in a moment, the shadows seemed to transform, and they saw father and son, or siblings in loving contest. The pair often lifted their heads, hoping to spy the source from whence the shadows came, yet saw nothing but a bright, sun-kissed mist spread across the sky. Sometimes, a profile of unspeakable beauty or grandeur would appear for a moment and then vanish. Other times, wild horses would tear across the valley, free or bestrode by noble shadows of men. But some of the things which pleased them most, they never knew how to describe. At length, they sat to rest in a heap of shadows, and neither spoke. They sat a long while, gazing out at the shadows, and when at last their eyes met, they were each brimming with tears. It was then that they knew. Mossy spoke first. "We must find the country from which the shadows fall." "Oh, yes, Mossy, we must," returned Tangle. "What if your golden key should be the key to it?" She wondered breathlessly. "Ah, that would be grand," he said. They gazed up once more at the sky, and then resumed their journey through the shadows. How long they were in crossing this plain, I cannot tell, but before night, Mossy's hair was streaked with gray, and Tangle had wrinkles across her forehead. The shadows grew deeper and rose higher, and soon they reached a place where the shadows rose far above their heads, and they gripped each other's hands tightly. In the gathering darkness, a solemnity fell over them. The beauty of the shadows ceased to delight them, and they could no longer make out their shapes. All at once, Tangle realized that she was no longer holding Mossy's hand, though when she lost it, she could not tell. She turned in terror. "Mossy! Mossy!" But no Mossy replied. So she threw herself to the ground and wept. But as she wept, she remembered the grand lady's words. "If you lose each other, go straight on, and do not be afraid." Tangle squeezed her eyes shut, resolving to go on. And when she opened them, she saw before her a large mountain with a yawning cave just ahead. She did not know why, but she felt she was meant to go in. She traveled the dark passageways until she came at last to the shore of a sea, a real sea, and far beyond the ocean's edge, she saw the faint glow of a huge rainbow, and sinking to the ground, slept in peace. She awoke to an old man, leaning down on a stick covered in green buds, looking at her intently. "Why are you here, beautiful woman?" "Am I beautiful? I'm so glad," answered Tangle, rising. "The grand lady is beautiful." "But what can I do for you?" he asked kindly. "I think you are the old man of the sea." "I am," replied the man, "and I can do something for you, can I not?" He looked keenly into her eyes. "Well, yes," Tangle hesitated. "Can you show me the way up to the country from whence the shadows fall?" She felt that wherever Mossy was, he was bound in the same way. "Ah, that I cannot," said the old man, "but I will send you to the old man of the earth. He is much older than I, and perhaps he can show you the way." He led her to a stair and directed her down it. She walked laboriously down the steep stone steps, and just when she began to feel that they had no end, she emerged into a silver cavern, alight with the glow of, what was it? As she looked around, she saw a bent figure with a long silver beard hunched over something at his feet. His back was to her, and he didn't seem to notice her. She approached him slowly. Upon seeing his face, she realized that he was a handsome youth. And his beard was no beard at all, but the shining reflection of a silver mirror, and he was peering into it. He looked deeply into the mirror, and she could tell he was entranced with the joy of what he saw. At last she spoke. "Are you the old man of the earth?" she asked. She could not hear her own words, yet the youth looked up and smiled. "I am," he said. "What can I do for you?" "Tell me the way to the country from whence the shadows fall." "Ah, that I do not know, but I think the old man of fire must know. He is much older than I. He is the oldest man of all. I will show you to him." The young man rose. She followed him to the rock wall, and he bid her put her ear upon it. "Do you hear that sound?" he asked. She listened, then nodded. "That is the sound of a great river. It runs down to the dwelling of the oldest man of all. That river is your only guide." And so saying, he heaved a huge stone from the floor of the cave, revealing a massive hole of fathomless darkness. "That is the way," he said. "But there are no stairs." "You must throw yourself in. That is the only way." She stared at him speechless for what seemed like a whole minute, but was really a whole year, and threw herself down into the hole. She landed in a stream, and it carried her down for what seemed like miles until it deposited her gently on a rocky ledge. It was hot, and the stones scorched her feet. She spied a curved stairway, and taking a deep breath of resolve, descended the scalding steps. And when she thought she could bear the heat no longer, she found a crude archway and threw herself through it. To her surprise, it was a cool, mossy cave. A stream trickled through, and she drank of it deeply. When at last she stood, she looked around, and saw at once, in the corner of the cave, a little naked child, sitting on a mossy stone that jutted from the wall. He was arranging balls of various colors and sizes, and all at once, Tangle felt that there was something in her knowledge which was not in her understanding. she saw that there was a sequence or a pattern to the arranging and rearranging of balls, and within seconds, all that she had heard in stories or songs and everything she had experienced on her journey with Mossy made sense. It all meant the same thing, though she could not have put it into words again. She watched as diligently and ceaselessly the child shifted the balls into hundreds of arrangements and patterns. Now and then flashes of meaning would pass from them to Tangle, but before she could fully comprehend it, the meaning would again obscure itself and grow dark. She stood watching, transfixed. For 7 years she watched, though to her it felt like 7 hours. All at once, the balls took a shape that, for whatever reason, reminded her of the Valley of Shadows, and she spoke. "Where is the old man of fire?" she asked. "Here I am," replied the child, and leaving his balls on the moss, he walked towards her. "Are you the oldest man of all?" Tangle stammered at last. "I am, and I am able to help you." The naked child drew even nearer, and as he grew closer, Tangle burst into tears, for from his face shone such a glorious light that Tangle thought his brilliant visage might shatter at any moment and reveal such a ravishing smile that would cause the beholder to weep himself to death. But the smile never came, and the light lay unbroken, for the heart of the child was too deep for any smile to reach from it to his face. "Can you tell me the way to the country from which the shadows fall?" she sobbed. "Yes, I can, but you are too young to go my way." "Oh, but please don't send me into the heat again," she begged. "I will not." And the little child reached up, put his hand against her heart, and a cooling sensation ran through her weary body. "Now the fire will not burn you. Come." He led her from the cave and through another archway, which led to a desert-like place of sand, dangerously thick with heavy rocks overhead and rivulets of lava streaming down the walls on either side. "This is the way," said the child, and he reached under a rock to retrieve an egg-like shape. When he placed it in the sand, it hatched into a serpent. "Follow him," said the child. "He will lead you the right way." Tangle obeyed, but as she followed the serpent, she couldn't help looking back at the gleaming child until he disappeared from sight. While Tangle had been journeying, Mossy journeyed too. When he lost Tangle, he too was full of despair, and he longed for his darling Tangle. But like Tangle, he remembered what the grand lady had said, and he went on. Sadly, there is no time to tell you of Mossy's journey, but he also met the old man of the sea. His exchange was different, for that golden key gives a different kind of vision to the one who carries it. But his journey was transformative, and the old man of the sea guided him onward as he had Tangle. And at last, on the other side of the ocean, Mossy came to another shore, but a great towering precipice blocked his way. In fact, the rock stretched to his right and his left as far as he can see and reached up for miles. There were no footholds or crags by which to climb. He scanned the rock, desperate for some clue, when he saw a tiny glitter. Yes, it did glitter, and in fact, it glittered for just a moment, a glorious blue. He leapt forward and found a neat little row of miniature sapphires, sparkling in joyous conglomeration around a little hole in the rock. Keyhole! Mossy cried aloud with joy, and without hesitation, fitted the key into the hole, entered. A clang and a clash thundered from behind the rock, and the crunch of tumbling rock and cascading gravel split the air above him. but he was unhurt. Instead, the rock fell away before him like a stair, leading him step by step as piece after piece of rock fell from the ceiling, carving a path through the mountain. At last, the rocks fell no more, and Mossy emerged into a rounded hall with a vaulted roof, crude in formation but covered from floor to ceiling in masses of colored gemstones, blazing in every color that light can show. In the center of the room stood 7 columns, ranging in color from red to violet, and amongst them, sitting on a pedestal, was a woman, her face bowed beneath her knees. 7 years had she sat there waiting. She lifted her head as Mossy approached. Her hair was rippled like the windless sea on broad sands. Her face was beautiful, her form tall and noble. Yet Mossy knew her at once. "How beautiful you are, Tangle," he said in delight and astonishment. "Am I? Oh, I have waited for you so long, my own Mossy." She had 100 questions to ask him, and he 100 more to ask her. They told each other all their adventures and were as happy as a man and woman could be. For they were younger and better and stronger and wiser than they had ever been before. But it wasn't long before the room began to dim. The light of the gemstone-studded walls faded and they were lost in darkness. Now they wanted more than ever to reach the country from whence the shadows fell. They searched desperately for a way out of the cave, but the door through which Mossy had come was sealed, and there was half a mile of rock between them and the sea. And Tangle could not find the opening in the floor through which the serpent had led her. Utterly dismayed, they sat down in a beleaguered silence, hand in hand, each lost in a spiral of despairing thoughts. But it couldn't be. How could it be? All this way? All these years? How many years was it anyway? But it was oh so beautiful, that rainbow. How could it not be real? It was too beautiful, just too awfully, terribly, wonderfully beautiful. And at that moment, the cave began to glimmer again, this time pale and silver. They looked up. A beam of light shone from a moon and began filtering down through the colored pillars until the room was resplendent with the radiance of a rainbow. And now Mossy noticed an 8th pillar, standing beside the red, the same color he had first seen in the rainbow on the day that he had found the golden key. And on that pillar, his eye caught a sparkle of blue. He looked at Tangle, and Tangle looked at him. And slowly, as though he knew there was no turning back, Mossy raised the key to the sapphire-studded keyhole. He turned the lock, and the sounds of Aeolian music shimmered on the air like fluttering wings. An invisible door opened on slow hinges and disclosed a winding stair within. The key vanished from his fingers. Tangle went up. Mossy followed. The door closed behind them. They climbed out of the earth, and still climbing rose above it. They were in the rainbow. Far abroad, over ocean and land, they could see through its transparent walls the earth beneath their feet. Stairs beside stairs wound up together, and beautiful beings of all ages climbed along with them. They looked at each other and smiled, for they knew that they were going up to the country from whence the shadows fall. And I think by this time, they must have got there.
Real quick, we want to share with our listeners the incredible opportunity to be a part of the Anselm Society's annual gathering, the Imagination Redeemed Conference. The dates for our 2022 conference are September 30th through October 1st, and once again, it will be held at Glen Erie Castle in Colorado Springs. That's right. Colorado Springs, we have our own castle. The theme this year is what to do with the time that is given to us. We'll explore a theology of time and take a deeply practical look at the relationship between God's eternity and the ways we wrestle with our own time. How can God redeem our past, both personal past and our corporate past? And how can we face the future with hope rather than anxiety on the one hand or naive optimism on the other? Please visit our website at anselmsociety.org and look into getting tickets for this year's Imagination Redeemed Conference. Hope to see you there. Let's talk about this story as regards to sort of the theme of the month. So the theme of the month is Imago. I just had a conversation about this earlier. Is it Imago or Imago?
I believe it's Imago.
Okay, Imago Dei. So this
Don't
is sort
quote
of,
me on that.
So this is sort of the theme story of the month. Why do you think this story fits so well with that theme?
Sorry, many things to juggle here. You know, that's an interesting question because I've honestly been asking myself that question ever since I've been reading and studying the story and working through it, rewriting it, bridging it, whatever you want to call it. And I think, well, first of all, I don't have a clear answer, but I do think there is something in imagination and in journeying through beauty and longing for beauty that shows us we are imaging the Creator who created all things to point towards Him. So that's probably the best answer I can give at this point. I'm sure there's someone who can do it better, but yeah, that's kind of my instinct.
Well, I think that instinct will be something that will be the answer to a lot of questions going forward whenever we're doing Mcdonald. I can't really put into words, but I can kind of feel in the direction of the right answer, maybe? I don't know. But, let's get back to the right way to read a Mcdonald story, because I've read some Mcdonald in the past, and I always felt like I was doing it wrong, like I was missing something, or like is this an elaborate allegory that I'm missing, or whatever. So you talked a little bit about this before you started, but what do you think the best ways are to read a Mcdonald story? Should you do what I tend to do is like, that has to be a symbol for something, or do you just, or am I just off from the beginning?
I'm afraid you're such a rule follower that I can't comment on that. But no, for real. Honestly, I love symbolism. I'm always tempted to find it in everything. And honestly, like creation-wise, I do think God did embed His fingerprints into creation, right? For us to find and imitate and lead us toward Him. But I do think there is something to be said for just letting myths wash over you and sort of fantasy, and not to look for allegorical clues and everything. There was... Nope, never mind, lost that thought.
So related to that, famously, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had very different opinions on this story. Tolkien hated it because I think he was doing what I was doing, like looking for allegory everywhere. It's like, well, obviously this is a symbol for this, and then, it's just way too heavy-handed. Yeah. Whereas Lewis was basically like, hey, relax. He's making a myth here, dude. Just let it wash over you.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So it's basically I'm the Tolkien, you're the Lewis here.
Ish. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with that said, and with that sort of trying to orient what we're doing here, I think there are a lot of themes we can get into. But I think some of the best themes they're represented in what you were telling, but we're talking earlier when you were still preparing for this about some of the scenes you had to delete. You had to kill your darlings, but you cried as you killed your darling.
They weren't my darlings. I think that's probably why it hurt so much.
It's like at the end of Old Yeller, what happened with Christina shooting these darlings, but but what were some of the scenes that were the hardest cuts for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, I would venture to say all, but Mcdonald is so rich in. So even if there's no allegory, he still is an extremely wise human, and so cutting anything just feels like a tragedy. Like, that was one of the wisest things I have ever read, and I have to take it out. So that stinks. But there was some very, very strange things. I really wanted to keep this part in, and I know some of you know the story, some of you don't. But there is this strange little fish, airbird creature with fins instead of wings.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yep, rainbow scales. And that was painful to cut out. Basically, this is the fish that led the little girl from, well, actually it was a tree that attacked her. But a tree attacked her, and the fish saved her and led her to this cottage where this beautiful grand lady is. And there's a huge exchange with this beautiful woman, and there's so much wisdom, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of where, sorry, yeah, I'm trying to get through all the good parts, and I can't. There's no time. But anyway, the strange fish creature, right? It appears more than once in the story, and actually it also guides Mossy under the ocean. So it's a different creature, but it's actually guiding him under the water, and he doesn't notice. So, but yeah, the weirdest thing about these creatures, other than the fact that they look ridiculously bizarre, is that they sacrifice themselves into a boiling pot of water to be eaten. And they are eaten by Mossy and Tinkle on purpose. It is very odd. I have theories, though.
Okay, so when I was reading the story, I was tracking, like Mossy's finding the rainbow. It's all right, cool, I'm with you. Then I get to the flying fish with the feathers, and when I read it, I was like...
Scales.
Yeah, I was like, I must have read that wrong. That can't be what it is. But it was, and yeah, they get to the cottage, and the flying fish is like, awesome, I'll hop into the pot and be dinner tonight. This will be really cool. And that's what happens. And Tangle finds this odd, as do the rest of us, but the Grand Lady explains that when they're in this form, that is like their highest calling. Mm-hmm. And then the fish creature like resurrects as like this higher being that they can't even like describe sufficiently, and then the higher being sort of pops up. So there's definitely this theme of sacrifice and resurrection there, and that, like you said, it keeps popping up throughout. Another theme that seems to keep popping in and out is time. Time is a very fluid concept in this story. So you'll see Tangle, she's out what she thinks is a night, it's actually 3 years. She, sits there watching the boy for 7 hours. It's actually 7 years. Like, people get old, they get young again. What do you think McDonald's getting at with this whole time going up and down and in, circles and loop-de-loops?
Yeah, it's so stunning. I mean, Anselm did a whole time theme last month, and the essay written by Jane Charles is amazing. I do recommend going and reading it if you haven't already, because she does address time and how the limitations of time is actually a beautiful thing, and it's actually way more mind bending than we think, and just the idea of God being outside of time. And anyway, it's incredible. Blew my mind. But I think there's a point, right, where we all are just frustrated and pained by time and the way it passes. And I think, me reading this a couple times, I was like, but no, they're older. Wait, what happened during those 3 years? Like, where are they? What happened? It's like when you read a novel, right? And then you have like cool characters, and then they get like 40 years older. You're like, but wait, and you were lovers, weren't you? Like, oh yeah, they got married and had some kids. And by the way, this is a story about the kid now. Like, wait. Anyway, yeah. So I think honestly, like he speaks to that on purpose, like with the turning of time and the changing of time and the growing old and the growing young. And I do think there's I don't know. Oh, there's so many thoughts, but I think that it does speak to beauty and to wisdom and to what true goodness and true beauty and true godliness is. There's a lot of words like grace and noble, grand, right? So there's a lot of adjectives that we don't think of as like attractive or hot or sexy or whatever. They're very mature and stunning. I know you're just chuckling. It's very mature and just kind of like jaw-dropping words that are used to describe their beauty and nobility. Yeah.
Okay, I'm about to give my theory of the case, but first, Brian, how much time do I have?
You're good.
Okay, I have time for my theory of the case. I think the key to this story, to trying to wrap your head around it, is the 8th color of the rainbow.
Yes.
Okay, because we have, hey, oh, thank you.
Yes.
Support from the audience.
We need to hear what she has to say.
Okay.
Yes. And if you guys do have your cards, pass them in. So.
All right, so we have the rainbow, which of course is the very thing that they're going off of. And they talk about the 7 colors. This is before indigo was cut off from the list. So there are 7 colors of the rainbow. Then as the boy's coming up to the rainbow at first, he notices that there's an 8th color, like beyond red. And you see this mentioned every now and then in like fiction. That's always blown my mind because everyone, like right now, close your eyes, try to think of a new color. You know, like not a new shade of a color, 2 colors mixed, like a whole brand new color. Like it's impossible. Like we can't even use words to describe it. But that seems to be the animating thing. It brings the boy to the rainbow at first, and it's their secret up the rainbow, up this sort of rainbow bridge up to the land from whence the shadows came. So I think I almost feel like that's what McDonald's trying to do. He's trying to describe a new color of the rainbow to us through symbolic language, through narrative, through all this stuff. And we can't quite get it. Like the old man of the fire playing with, look like little toys, and every now and then Tangle will get like a flash of an answer, but she can't put it into words. I feel like that is what's going on. So yeah, that is my theory of the case. And I would give you the mic back, but I'm afraid you'll disagree with me. So I'm going to launch into a totally different question. Okay, fine. You can respond. I recommend agreeing.
You recommend agreeing? Of course you do. No, I actually do. I don't know if it's the key, but I do think it is very significant, and I think there is also, I do really want to hear what you have to say, so I don't know if you can say it or not, but I was just talking to this lovely lady here. But there's such a use of, like one of the things that was really interesting to me was when the little boy first encountered the key, he picked it up in a terror of delight, and those were McDonald's words. And to me, there's just this idea that McDonald plays with of God being so beautiful and so grand. He's terrible and like in awful and in all those old-fashioned senses of the word. And then again, the color that he could not describe, but he seemed for. And then Tangle, everything meant the same thing, though she could not have put it into words again. And I think there is that huge theme of like, God is unknowable, but he is beautiful. And so I think that's a big part, yeah.
And let the record show that when Christina said, I really want to hear what you have to say, she's not talking to me, okay? But anyway, I'm glad you mentioned terror of delight, because as you were giving your story, I was sort of making notes, and I wrote down the phrase terror of delight, because that really stuck out to me too. Mm-hmm. And again, that seems to be something that animates a lot of George MacDonald's writing. There's a heaviness to it, even if we're around a fundamental goodness. I'm thinking about Phantastes, when the main narrator, he's like wandering through this huge abandoned palace from room to room, and you're like, there's some gravity here, even though this is a good and beautiful place that he's in. I'm also reminded of something that Susanna Clark, author of Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, Piranesi, she was describing Piranesi in an interview, and I think I kind of have to remember this, but she's talking about it as sort of an anti-horror story. Whereas like a horror story, there's like the conceit is there's like this evil at the core of the story, and they're trying to like go through the layers and layers to get to like the core evil, like why is the house haunted? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Whereas for Piranesi, or for George MacDonald, it's all the same thing in reverse, where at the core, there's all this seriousness, there's all this gravity, there's all this danger, but at the core, there's this fundamental goodness, there's this fundamental, like joy and love at the center of the things. And I will let you react to that as I sift through some of our audience questions.
Wonderful. Yes, actually, I love history, but so whenever I read an author, I definitely use Google's Wikipedia function. It is no longer banned like it was when I was in school for being the evil, bad source material. So, no, all that to say, I do love to Google the authors. And one thing about George MacDonald that really stood out to me was that he was really raised in a house that had a very, very strong and nurturing father figure. And he was close to his father his whole life, which tends to be unusual, I think. Well, I have seen it be more and more, sadly, unusual in my generation. So to me, it was really interesting. McDonald had a really interesting grasp on the father-son relationship and the relationship of love, and the love not just between father and son, but there's some kind of union that he got about God, the Father, that a lot of us don't quite understand. And a lot of that came from his earthly father. And he also encountered some very, very stringent, slightly heretical theology from, I think, maybe his grandmother. I don't know, someone. I don't remember who it was. But basically, the whole, you're going to hell if you do such and such. And McDonald was kind of a good boy, but as he was influenced by the Romantic movement, he kind of thought, well, what if love came into the picture? What if my father is more like what God is, not what his grandmother figure, whoever it was, I apologize that I don't remember who it was, it was like. So anyway, all that to say, with the background, I think that does kind of influence his stories, and he sort of has that reverence for God. He was Scottish, he was Presbyterian, raised Calvinist, so he has the gravity, right? And but he also has that passion for love and understanding the love of God. So does that answer?
I think it does. And as you were talking, you see me nodding along to all the cards. Luckily, these are all good questions, so thank you all. So some of these are kind of multiple, so we won't be able to get to every single one, but I want to touch on everyone who sent one in. First one, this is something I was wondering, so thank you to whoever wrote it. Why is there always a beautiful, kind old lady in George MacDonald stories? Yes. There's also one in The Princess and the Goblin. Who said that one? Oh, yep, good job. Good job. So please do tell. Let me be. So when you read enough stories, as a lot of us Anselm types do, your radar goes up. And when I first came across the Grand Lady, reading the story, the first I was like, something's up with her. She can't be that good. She has to be a secret villain, but she wasn't.
Yes, I know.
What's up with this?
It's true.
I know. Well, it's interesting too because as I was doing the abridged version, right? I wanted to keep in the very first thing that the woman said was, "There you are. I've been waiting a long time for you." Yeah, and that is the first thing that she hears. And she was neglected by the nursemaids, and her father did abandon her to them. Her mother died, etc., etc. So the idea of her being waited for and longed for, and she was kind of rechristened. Her name Tangle was what her nursemaids called her because she had tangly hair. And so this woman says, how naughty of them. But Tangle is a nice name, and I think you should keep it, basically. So I will call you Tangle. Right. So she says it's a rechristening of, of who she is and her identity and her beauty and her importance, right? And then like the Princess and the Goblin, she said, you can call me grandmother, and she's thousands of years old, but won't tell the character how old she is. And there's this idea of time and age being, again, very incomprehensible. Again, go back to the time theme. But I don't know that I can actually speak to why those characters are not evil. But I do love that they're not.
Well, I don't want to fly my own flag here, but it gets to the anti-horror story. Anyone else? No? Okay, whatever. So a couple questions that I think they're kind of getting at the same thing. We're running a little low on time. So a couple folks had questions about the other country or the shadows of this, from whence the shadows came. So I think a lot of us would probably think Plato's metaphor of the cave, right? So we have that sort of thing where we have the other country. So tell me a little bit of how you think the shadows animate fairyland. So it's sort of go beyond fairyland almost.
Sorry, animate fairyland as in...
That didn't make sense, and then I just handed the microphone to you?
Sorry.
In what ways do you think the journey for this sort of other place, all they know is that beautiful shadows come from there, how does that animate the story?
Define animate.
This is when we need more than one microphone. So it seems like that is like, if we want to get all symbolic here, like that is the core longing, that the other country, the place where you can see the eighth color of the rainbow, where all of this comes into being. And actually, that's a good segue to the final card. Thank you again to whoever wrote this. Something in her knowledge, but not in her understanding. That was a good point. Who wrote that one? Mandy. I'm not surprised.
You just sound
Mandy,
it.
you are
It's okay.
insightful? What? No, of course Mandy was insightful. But I like that because it gets this difference between knowledge and understanding, which you can see in a lot of different places in the story, right?
Yeah, I love that too because there's so much theology, and a lot of the theology is lost, actually. We don't talk about it a lot now, but there's this idea of us being from somewhere, right? And it's not that we were just, like, created to, like, be cool in a place, you know? Like there's a part of us that is with God and in God and in imaging, right? You know, so there is a part of us that we do not fully know. Wait, in our knowledge but not understanding. I'm trying to, like, in my head I get words mixed up. But
Describe the eighth color right now. Yeah.
Okay. No. Yeah. So I think there's something that we sometimes feel we belong to someone or to something, or we long, right? We long for someone or something, and we can't figure it out, and it still hurts. Like it hurts deep in our hearts. So I think that, I don't know. For me, that hits home so hard because it really does speak to us being a part of something that is, I think, not yet come to pass. And I think there's thunder. There you go. Ta-da!
I really hope the thunder got picked up on the podcast.
On the mic, yeah.
That was very well timed.
That was very well timed. Thank you.
Final question for you, and it's along those lines, and it's just someone to know what do you think is for you the big takeaway from the story? Like what would you have missed the most if you had never read this story?
Certainly the idea that there was another writer out there who had this grand sense of beauty and its importance in centering around the love of God. And that just speaks to me so deeply. I think putting love and beauty together as characteristics of God, it's just so powerful, and I don't encounter a lot of writers who do it really well. And so I think I was so excited to share the story because not only is it magical, and I think magic can just carry us a long way, I think it's meant to, but there's just something about two children who grow into adults longing for something, and they kind of grow into that. I think it's also worth noting that I think McDonald does a very intentional thing when he has Mossy, at the beginning of the story, a very confident little boy who has this sort of hope, right? He has this like expectation of good things, and of course he's going to go adventure, and of course he's going to go find the golden key, right? Because that's what you do. And he has this sort of expectation and hope of something wonderful. And the little girl, right, she's just running. She's terrified, right? And so she runs straight into the forest. But there's this place where they meet, not physically meet, but where their sort of expectations and desires meet together. And there's this idea of like the person who is like seeing something beyond, and there's this idea of the person who is running from something and they don't know what, but they're running towards God. And it's kind of this, and that's again what the fish kind of guided her, right? There's a line in Mcdonald. That's kind of what I tried to do when I said that, like, the susceptibility. There's seeds, right, of belief in there that the fairies can't always tell, right? There is a guidance that's taking us from the place where our fears are towards the Lord. And so I love that. And there's one more thing. hate forgetting you guys. I'm so sorry. There's like always this one more point that I'm going to make, and I never make it.
It's in your knowledge, but not in your understanding.
Amen. Amen.
So,
Amen.
Everyone, let's give Christina a big hand for telling us this great story. And there you have it. George MacDonald, wow, right? I mean, I already gave my opinions during the Q&A, but wow. So that again was our July pub night. So thank you very much for listening. Once again, Anselm Society brings you Believe to See. And if you want to find out more about the Anselm Society, visit us at anselmsociety.org. And as the fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass, as you can guess, things are winding down here at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.